Hello everyone, it's Megan with Fine Designs by Megan. Welcome back to my channel and happy Halloween to you guys. So today I'm going to be doing a Halloween edition video, and what this is going to partake is I'm going to be making this true crime tumbler while I'm telling you a true crime story about a serial killer back in the mid-80s outside of Dallas. No one ever heard of this man, and I'm kind of surprised that no one heard of him because he was labeled as one of the most gruesome serial killers in Texas, and no one's ever heard of him. So I'm going to tell you guys about him today. And while I'm doing this, why I'm doing it is because during the day while I'm making my tumblers for my customers, I sit here and I watch true crime videos all day. It's something I've always been interested in. I just love it. I actually wanted to go to school for this, but I'd probably end up murdering someone that abused children, so that's probably not a good idea. But I just love it. And me and one of my Tumblr sisters were talking, and I was telling her about this story, and she's like, Megan, make a Tumblr and tell this story. Like, you need to tell this story because it's so crazy. So we're going to attempt it. We're going to try it. It's not going to be perfect. I'm not one of them professional true crime storytellers, okay? But I'm going to tell you the story. It's very interesting, and you're going to be like, wow. But before I tell you guys this story, I mean nothing bad to anyone that is going to be talked about in this, okay? Because other than the serial killer and his father and his mom, they're still alive that I know of, except one of the sisters, but I'll tell you about that later. And then before we get started, if blood or murder or rape, animal abuse, child rape, suicide, alcohol, drugs, if any of those bother you, go ahead and click off this video. I don't want it to affect you any, and you can just come back later and watch my actual Tumblr tutorials, which I'll be posting a few in the next couple days. So now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started with this roller coaster ride of a story, okay? This story, I got a lot of my information from this book. It's called Blood Rush. It's by Patricia Springer. And she actually wrote this book about Ricky while Ricky was on death row. And she would visit him in the Huntsville death row down in Texas. And he told her his whole life story, from his childhood through his relationships to murdering, to getting caught, all of it. And I'm not going to tell you everything in this story because it's so much and I would be here for hours, but I'm going to break it down, hit a few of the main important spots, and tell you as much as I can. If you want to know more, if you want to see pictures, you can get this book. It's very gruesome, but it tells you everything. So if you're interested in that thing, you can Google this book and find it and purchase it. Okay? So let's go ahead and get started with this crazy story. So I'm going to take you back to when Ricky was a child because I think that is very important that you kind of understand the abuse that he went through as a child. And I am not saying at all that he became a serial killer because he was abused. That's not what I'm saying. But I am going to say that I think that the abuse that he received as a child, I think it affected him a lot as an adult. He had a very low self-esteem, and he just wanted to be loved, so he would latch on to anyone that would love him, and he wanted to always try to prove that he was something because his dad made him feel like he was worthless and nothing. So now that we got that out of the way, I'm going to take you back to when he was a child. So Ricky Lee Green was born on December 27th of 1960 to Bill and Lou Green. Bill is described as a horrible, awful, evil man. And he wasn't just horrible to his children, he was horrible to everyone, including his wife and the people that worked for him. Okay? So that's how he's described. Now, Ricky's mom is described as a sweet, loving mother, but she felt just as trapped as the kids. She wanted to protect her kids from Bill, but she didn't know how to protect them from Bill because Bill abused her just as much as he abused their children. So she was trapped just as much as the kids in this situation. And when Ricky was 4 years old, they lived in Texas outside of Dallas, and in the summer it is hot there. I live in Arkansas, and I know it's really hot here, so I can't imagine exactly how hot it is down there in Texas. Well, Tony, which is Ricky's little brother, so Ricky had an older sister, Teresa, and after Teresa it was Perry, and then it was Ricky, and about a year younger than Ricky was his little brother, Tony. And they were inseparable. They were always together. They were always playing. And it was them. They were just a team, him and Tony. And on this day, when Ricky was 4, him and Tony were outside playing. And Tony had picked up a piece of barbed wire. I don't know if you know what barbed wire is, and I hope I'm saying that right. That's just how I say it with my little accent. I can't help it. And he picked up this piece of barbed wire, and it was hot from sitting out in the sun. And he went to throw it, and it actually ended up hitting Ricky in his left eye, and it tore his left pupil. And his mom rushed into the hospital, but they were unable to save Ricky's eye. So from that time in his life, he became blind. And he ended up getting a glass eye later down the road, but he did lose his sight, and that just made it even harder on him. He just got made fun of more by his dad, from people at school. It just made his life even more rough than it already was. So, in his childhood, I'm not going to tell you all of the abuse. Some of it is just so bad, I can't even talk about it. But I'll tell you a few things that his dad would do to him, so you guys can understand just how horrible his father was. When he was 6 years old, he tells a story about how his father would make him and his older brother Perry. Tony never received a whole lot of the abuse, but he did receive some of the abuse. But in the way that Ricky describes everything, he pretty much got the worst of it. His dad, for some reason, did not like him, and he tortured Ricky. It's really horrible. But in this situation, his dad would make him and his brother Perry, they would start on the porch, and he would make them take off running off the porch as fast as they could. And while they're trying to run away from their horrible, awful dad, he would sit on the porch with a BB gun, and he would shoot his children in the back, in the butt, with little BBs. And they would get hit, and they would just fall on the ground crying. And his dad got off by watching his children literally crying in pain. He thought it was great, and he would do it over and over to his little children, this horrible stuff. And this is just one of the things that he did. There was a few other things, like he would make them hold on to electric wire fences. He would always try to electrocute them. He would beat them. He would put them in closets. Ricky had a thing, he would pee the bed a lot, probably from the abuse. And his dad would rub his head in his pee and make him lay in his dirty, wet clothes and in his dirty bed all day. One instance, he was eating at the kitchen table, and his dad would make his children eat everything on their plate. And his mom had made okra, boiled okra. He could stand like fried okra a little bit more, but like the boiled okra just made him sick, that slimy, nasty feeling in his mouth. And his dad made him eat all of his food. And Ricky had ate everything around his okra. And his dad was like, no, Ricky, you're going to eat your okra. And Ricky tried to do it, and it ended up making him gag, and he ended up throwing up in his plate. And you would think that his dad would be like, okay, Ricky, that's, go to your room. You're in trouble. I can't believe you did that. Throw your plate away. But that's not what he did. He got up behind Ricky, pushed his head in the plate into his vomit, and then he made Ricky eat the okra and his vomit off his plate. Like, he could not leave until his plate was clean. That's one of the horrible things that he did. I'm going to skip around some of them because I just can't talk about them. But one of the instances when he was 11 years old, and the only reason I'm telling you this is because this has to do with something bad that ended up affecting him. When he was 11 years old, his dad made him and Perry stand up against the wall with their nose up to the wall. And if their little feet, they had to stand on their tippy toes, and if their feet hit the ground, his dad would get a metal fly swatter and beat their feet. And he said that he did it because you have your shoes on, so you can't see bruises on your bottom of your feet or on the top of your feet with your shoes on. So his dad knew that no one would know that he had beat his children if he was hitting them in areas that, people aren't going to see. Well, this really affected Ricky, and the next day he had just had enough. He had enough of the abuse, enough of it. So he goes to school, and he ends up leaving school early, takes off out of school by himself, and he runs away. Okay? So he's hitchhiking down the highway, and he ends up getting picked up by a gentleman, and the gentleman takes him to Lake Worth, to a beach at Lake Worth called Casino Shores. And Casino Shores was known for where a lot of homosexual people would go, and they would pick up clients for prostitution and stuff. A lot of drug deals and stuff would go on there also. And so that's where this guy ended up dropping little Ricky off. I don't know if at this time Ricky knew that that's what that place was. It don't really say. But that's where he ended up going, okay? And while he's there, Ricky's just walking along the shores, and he comes across this guy. And this guy's like, hey, little boy, do you want to go, into town and get some food? And Ricky was like, okay, he didn't really have anywhere else to go. So he's like, yeah, sure, I'll go with you to town and we'll get some food. And so he walks over to this guy's car, and this guy comes up behind him. His name was John. He comes up behind him, and Ricky says he could smell the alcohol in his breath, and he knew this situation was not going to be very good. And this guy ends up grabbing Ricky, pushes him down in the back of his car, and he rapes Ricky. And you think that he would let him go afterwards. He didn't. So he ends up kidnapping Ricky, and he keeps Ricky hostage for a week. And during this week, he just would repeatedly rape him over and over and beat him. And Ricky says at one time he thought about trying to run away from him, but he was scared that if he did, this John guy would just kill him. So he just stayed there and took all of the abuse, all of it. He endured every single bit of it. And after a week went by, they were just jumping from different lake areas, different campgrounds, different places that you could camp out at night. They were just jumping from one spot to the next. And his dad, Bill, actually found him and saved him from this John guy. But, you think this dad would be sad and trying to nurture this boy that had just been beaten and raped for a week, but he didn't. So he picks up poor little Ricky, and he takes him to his grandfather's cabin out on Possum Kingdom Lake or something like that. And so Ricky's all excited because his grandpa had always been really good to him, and he always felt like his grandfather actually loved him. So he was, actually excited about it because he wasn't going to be beat by his dad. And so he gets to the lake, and he goes fishing with his grandfather, and nothing's out of the ordinary at this point. But that evening, his grandfather takes him in his room, and he tells Ricky to strip off his clothes and get in bed with him. And you know what happens from there. So his grandfather ends up raping Ricky, and his father kept him there for 2 weeks. So the next 2 weeks, his grandfather just raped him over and over and over again. But for Ricky, with John and what John did to him, he felt beaten and abused, and it was awful. But what his grandfather did with him, he actually he knew it was wrong, but he felt loved in some kind of way, and he always loved his grandfather even after that, which I don't understand, but I mean, I don't know. So that was what happened to Ricky when he was 11. And I forgot to tell you guys something. So remember little Tony? When Tony was 6 years old, so when Ricky was 7, Tony actually had got leukemia and passed away. And that even hurt Ricky more. So not only was he being abused, he lost his brother, his best friend, when he was 7. And then, when he was 11, he got raped. And by the time that he's an adult, he had done like some theft, and he dropped out of school when he was in the 9th grade. He ran away numerous times. He was already doing drugs, drinking, smoking cigarettes, prostituting when he was a teenager. When he was 15 years old, he ran away and was prostituting down in Shreveport, Louisiana. Like, this boy had a rough life. And by the time he was even an adult, he had went through stuff that most adults never even go through. And the abuse that he felt from his father, it never ended. It continued. Even when he was adult, his dad was still abusing him. And for some reason, he never left his dad. He stayed, pretty close to where his dad was. He worked with his dad. His dad owned 4 businesses. They owned a boat shop, a mechanic shop, a restaurant, a gas station, all outside of the Fort Worth area in Boyd, Texas, is where these businesses were. His dad was just a horrible man, okay? You'll learn a little bit more about him even further down the road. But we're going to go to when Ricky was 21 years old, and he was working at his dad's mechanic shop, and he came across a waitress at the restaurant named Mary Catherine, and he just really had feelings for her. He thought she was gorgeous, and he would flirt with her over and over and over again. And a few weeks after flirting with her, he actually asked her if she would go on a date with him. But Mary Catherine was married, but she was in a very, not a great marriage. And she ended up going on a date with Ricky. So she goes on this date with Ricky, and she ends up staying the night with Ricky. Woo woo, they stay the night together. Okay, so Mary Catherine ends up staying the night with Ricky, and they have sex all night. And the next day, like, Ricky does not want her to leave. So he's like, Mary Catherine, please just leave your husband and move in with me, okay? And she was kind of like iffy about it, but she ends up leaving her husband, and she does end up moving in with Ricky. And she had a 7-year-old son, and he ends up moving in with Ricky too. And they stay together for about 6 weeks, and her husband ends up talking her in to going back with him. So she leaves Ricky after 6 weeks, and this just like breaks Ricky's heart. But just after a few days of leaving him, she ends up coming back to him and leaving her husband again. Whew, what a roller coaster that was. So she goes back to Ricky. Ricky's all excited, and they actually stay together for 4 years, drinking, doing drugs, living their great life. And after 4 years, Mary Catherine wanted more. She didn't want just to be, his girlfriend or his live-in whatever, his partner. And they end up getting married. So he ends up marrying Mary Catherine in 1984. And that only lasted for 8 months. He was never abusive to her, but he had a drinking problem. Like, he drank a lot. He was like a major alcoholic. And he got so drunk one time. This was the last night. And he got drunk, and he made Mary Catherine strip her clothes off. And after she was naked, he got on top of her on the living room floor, and he had a knife, and he was like, I don't really know what he was doing, but he was like rubbing the knife like up and down her body, and it freaked her out. But by this time, Ricky was so drunk that he ended up passing out like on top of Mary Catherine. And she didn't even know what to do. She was too scared to move him. She was too scared that it would, wake him up, and then that torture would continue. Because she didn't know if he was going to kill her. She didn't know what his intentions were. He was just being creepy and weird. And so after about 2 or 3 hours of laying underneath him, trapped underneath Ricky's body, she actually was able to scoot out from underneath him. She packed everything she had up, and she left. She didn't go back. She was done. Like, that was it. That was the last straw. His drinking was bad. His drug use was bad, and she was just done. She wasn't going to have it around her child anymore, and she beat feet. And good for you, Mary Catherine. I'm glad you got out of there. Okay, so a few months later, about 6 months after Mary Catherine leaves, like, he is just broken. He is lonely. He just wants companionship. So he goes out looking for whatever he can get, okay? And he ends up going to a bar, and he's dancing with this girl named Barbara. and she ends up taking him to a table. And he didn't really like Barbara. She was a heavy-set woman, and he didn't find her really attractive, but, you know, she was easy, and she would dance with him. So he was just making her feel all kind of good, and she was buying him drinks, and she takes him back to a table with her friends, and this is where he meets Sharon Dollar, which ends up being Sharon Green later down the road, and this lady is crazy. So this ends up being the downfall of his life, is when he met her. So, he just starts drinking at their table, and she's there with her friends. It's her sister, Jamie, and, what happens is Barbara wants Ricky to go dance with her again. And he's been drinking a little bit. You know, he just says things that he shouldn't say. And he pretty much tells Barbara, no, I don't want to dance with you because you're fat and ugly. And that just breaks Barbara's heart. She starts crying. And everyone at the table's like, you know, maybe you should go ahead and leave. And so they tell Jamie, Sharon's sister, to leave with Ricky and make sure he gets home, okay, because he had been drinking a lot. And so Jamie ends up leaving with Ricky, and they go back to Ricky's trailer. He lived in a trailer. And they go back to Ricky's house, and they end up having sex. And I don't know, he said that it was some rough, good sex, but that's not who he wanted. He wanted her sister, Sharon. Ooh, he liked Sharon. So, the next morning, Jamie ends up leaving. Sharon ends up picking Jamie up. She ends up leaving. And about a week after she leaves, Jamie actually calls Ricky. And she's like, hey, do you want to hang out with me and Sharon? You want to go to the bar with us? And he's like, heck yeah, because, you know, he wanted Sharon. And so a week later, he ends up meeting up with, they pick him up, and he ends up meeting up with Sharon, Jamie, and one of Jamie's friends. And so while at the bar, him and Sharon are like, you know, having some fun, dancing, fondling each other, having a good old grand time, drinking. And they end up going in the bathroom, and he's like, you want to go back to my place? And she's like, yeah, let's go back to your place. So they end up leaving, Jamie and this other feller, and they go back to his place, and they have wild, sex, okay? Yeah, they just get it on. So they're having a little grand time, and after this is when they pretty much become inseparable, and they become a couple, okay? And he ends up staying with her at her house a lot. And Jamie ends up moving out because Jamie actually lived with Sharon. And about 3 months after dating, Sharon gets tired of Ricky not working. And she worked. She bought all their drugs, all of that stuff, alcohol. And she was tired of it. And she wanted Ricky to get a job. And Ricky knew that he could go work at his dad's shop. And there was a trailer for rent across from the shop. Okay, so they end up moving into this trailer house across from where Ricky's dad worked. And this is the infamous trailer that a lot of torture happens in. And I'm going to skip through a lot of it, but Ricky had a thing of getting drunk and like just taking off, and this was a few months after they were together, and he would just take off, go get drunk, that was just what he did. And he would take off for days, and about 3 days of being gone, he comes back to their house, and Sharon's like pissed off because Ricky had vanished, and she was like really mad. And so they just start having a confrontation, and he just starts like kissing her, and they end up having sex. But during sex, Ricky's laying there, and she's oral, okay? And he feels like a pain down there. And so he looks down, and he realizes that Sharon had actually got a safety pin and poked his area and caused him to bleed. And he's like, why did you do that? And she goes, because I want to taste your blood. This is the weirdest thing. She liked the taste of blood, and she liked to drink blood. This is the first time that he realized that, like, this broad is crazy, okay? But he loved her, and he just looked past that craziness. But she ended up, like, sucking the blood out from that poke, and that was the first instance that he knew that. Okay, so we're gonna skip a little bit. And then a little bit later, her daughter, so she had a daughter, Sarah, that actually lived with her and Ricky. And Sarah's dad lived in Connecticut. And she had to take Sarah back to Connecticut, back to her father's house, for she could visit her father. And while she's packing her bags, so get ready, because this is when the crazy roller coaster ride really begins. So she asked Ricky, have you ever killed someone? And Ricky's like, no. And she's like, have you ever thought about it? And he's like, no. And Ricky had, when he was a teenager, young child, his dad would make him and his brother Perry go out and kill armadillos. He would make them bash armadillos to death, and also cats, like stray cats that would go in their yard. He would make him and his brother kill these cats. So Ricky had already experienced killing things, but he had never killed someone before. And so Sharon's asking him, like, have you ever done that? And he's like, no. And she goes, well, I want you to. And he's like, what? And she goes, I want you to kill that boy that had stayed here a couple weeks ago. I want you to kill him, and I want you to bring me back his blood. And Ricky's like, why do you want his blood? And she goes, because I want to drink it. And so he had already known that she wanted his blood, done that, and now she wants this boy's blood. So I'm going to tell you about Jeffrey Davis before we jump into that roller coaster ride, okay? So Jeffrey Davis is a 16-year-old boy, and a month before this time, Jeffrey Davis was at Casino Beach, and he was walking with his girlfriend, and he had come across Sharon and Ricky, and him and his girlfriend had run away, and they had told, Ricky and Sharon, that they had run away and they didn't have anywhere to go. And so Sharon and Ricky offered Jeffrey and his girlfriend to go back to their place and stay the night, and then the next day that they would take them home to their parents. So that's what they did. So they go back to his house, they stay the night on a pallet on the living room, and the next day they take him home. And so Ricky hadn't even thought about this boy since this incident happened. He was just a little boy. He was described as kind of a short boy, not very heavy, just a little petite boy, okay? Well, this is the boy that she wanted him to go kill. So she takes off to Connecticut, okay? She's off in Connecticut doing her thing with her ex-husband and their daughter. And Ricky gets depressed because Ricky does not like to be alone. He does not like to be alone. He feels abandoned. And so, he's, missing Sharon. He's heartbroken that she's gone. Wah, wah. And he's getting drunk. And this is in April of 1985, okay, at this time. So he's getting drunk at Casino Beach, and he gets out of his car. He decides he wants to clean up his car. So he gets out, and guess who comes walking up? Jeffrey Davis. Come on, Jeffrey. Wrong place and a wrong time. You don't want to be there. And he ends up, talking to Ricky and drinking a few beers with him. And they just, start hanging out. And they get bored because there's no, they want to find a girl to hook up with. And they just can't find a girl to hook up with. So they're like, let's go to the next, let's go somewhere else and see if we can find some girls to hook up with. So they end up leaving Casino Beach, and they go to Benbrook Lake, and it's a lake not too far from where they're at. And they come across some college kids, and they start drinking with these college kids, and then they get bored because none of these girls are really wanting to hook up with them. So they end up deciding that they just want to leave. So Ricky and Jeffrey get back in Ricky's truck, and they go to leave. And while they're driving, they're still drinking, and Jeffrey looks at Ricky and he goes, hey, let's go rob some houses. Like, I know some houses that we can go rob. Well, this pissed Ricky off because Ricky didn't want to go rob any houses, and Jeffrey got mad at Ricky because Ricky didn't want to do it. So Jeffrey starts cussing at Ricky. Ricky starts cussing back at Jeffrey, and he's like, you need to shut the hell up. And Jeffrey would not shut up, and he kept going, and that just pissed Ricky off even more. So Ricky pulls over, he gets out of the car, and he goes down to the lake to go to the bathroom. And when he comes back, Jeffrey has his pants down past his knees playing with himself. And that just pissed Ricky off even more. And I don't really understand all that because Ricky had messed around with men as he was older. Jeffrey's not a man, but he had done stuff with other men, kind of like prostitution, that him and Sharon would prostitute for money to get, marijuana and alcohol. So being with a man's not something new to Ricky. But for some reason, this, like, pissed him off. And he's like, what are you doing? Like, don't put your pants back on. And Jeffrey, instead of putting his pants back on, he reaches over and starts fondling Ricky. And that was it. So Ricky just turns and he just backhands Jeffrey. And he just keeps on. And Jeffrey starts yelling and cussing at him because he was being attacked by him. And so they're just like, Jeffrey's yelling, Ricky's beating. And every time that Ricky or Jeffrey would put his head up, Ricky would hit him. And eventually, it was just so bad. And he ends up moving because there was some people. So he moves his truck up a little bit. And Jeffrey's still, like, telling him off. So he gets out of the truck. He pulls Jeffrey out onto the ground. And he just starts kicking him, hitting him. And he ends up knocking Jeffrey out unconscious. And he goes back to his truck, to the glove compartment, grabs a pocket knife, goes back to Jeffrey, pulls his head back, and he slits his throat. Ugh. It just aggravates me. Like, I just don't understand. This little boy's only 16 years old. Ricky's 25. And he slits his throat, and I guess from there he just started stabbing him. And Jeffrey's pants was still pulled down, so he goes down. He castrates him, throws his package out into the lake, and goes back, stabs him some more, and then he kind of snaps out of what he's done. He's like, oh God, I got a body. Well, yeah, you got a body, dude. You got a body. So he drags little Jeffrey down to the lake, pulls him out into the lake, and then he gets back in his truck, drives a little bit to see if you can see his body, and you could see his body. And that freaks him out a little bit. And so he gets Jeffrey's body, pulls him back up to the truck, and then he puts his body in the back of the truck and decides he's going to take him back to Lake Worth because he knew of a place that was kind of swampy and he could throw him out there and hide his body. So that's what he ends up doing. Okay, so I'm going to epoxy this cup. Y'all can watch me epoxy it. This cup I actually made, and I had done this video, and it was so long, so that's why I'm kind of skipping a lot of parts for it's not as long. So we're going to get back to where he was. So he gets Jeffrey's body, and he puts Jeffrey in the back of his truck, and he goes to take him. And listen to this, okay? He stops at a gas station, covered in blood, all right? Because, he has blood on him. He just murdered this boy. Goes in this gas station, seriously, and the attendant at the gas station says nothing. And Ricky's like, oh my God, like, I can't even believe this guy don't even notice that I'm covered in blood. Like, how does he not notice this? And so he gets back in his truck, and he goes and he dumps Jeffrey's body out there near a nature center in the swampy area, okay? And then about a week later, they end up finding Jeffrey's decomposing body. And when he had actually got home from dumping his body, he goes and takes a shower, and then he calls Sharon. Sharon, I did something really bad, and you need to come home. Like, you need to come home now, okay? I don't know if he actually told her what he did over the phone. I don't think he did. But I don't think she's stupid, and I think she knew what he had done. So, the balls of this man, okay? I'm going to tell you, Sharon comes home, all right? And she's getting off the plane, and he's there waiting for her to get off the plane. And this man wore the clothes that he killed Jeffrey in. He had washed them, but they were still bloodstained. He had the balls to wear his clothes that he killed him in to the airport so he could look masculine, like, oh yeah, I did what you told me to. I killed this boy. Like, I'm such a badass. You killed a 16-year-old boy. You're not that great, okay? But anyway, so he wears those clothes, and they go back home, and they don't really talk about it until that evening after she gets her daughter to sleep. Because remember, her daughter's only like 3 or 4 years old. Her little daughter, Sarah. So when Sarah's asleep, her and Ricky go back into their bedroom, and she was like, well, did you get it for me? You know, the blood. And he actually did. So when he had murdered Jeffrey, he had found a little tiny baby food jar, and he cleaned out the baby food jar, and he drained some blood from Jeffrey's neck into the baby food jar. Yeah. What a dang sicko. So he took the baby jar and he put it underneath their bed, and blood has to be refrigerated, okay? And so she goes, well, when did you kill him? And he goes, 3 days ago. And she goes, did you not refrigerate the blood? And he's like, no, because he didn't know that he had to. And the blood was pretty much spoiled, and it was no good. So that pisses Sharon off even more. She gets angry because, she can't drink that boy's blood. Pretty much killed little Jeffrey for nothing at this point. And they just don't talk for a few days. But they ended up making up, whatever. And not too long after Jeffrey was murdered, they went over to Ricky's mom's house for Mother's Day, and he noticed that his mom just didn't look good. Like, his mom looked sick. And not too long after Mother's Day, at the end of May of that year, Lou ends up dying. They don't really know what she died of, and the family that I talked to, they think that Bill killed her, but it's never been proven. They don't really know how she died, but she died at 44 years old, Ricky's mom. She was young, and before this, she was healthy, so she just died out of nowhere. I think Bill did it, but you know what? I don't know, okay? Who am I? So, anyway, so this just puts him in a bigger depression. So he's lost Tony. He's lost his mom. His wife is not wife at this point, but she's being a bee. And life's just not going really good for him. But they just continue to drink, do drugs, and in September of that year, they get married at Justice of the Peace. So his divorce is final for Mary Catherine, and he marries Sharon. How lovely. So him and Sharon get married. They're still continuing their thing. They would go pick up random people, have sex with random people, and, sell their bodies for drugs and liquor, whatever. That's just what they did. And about 6 weeks after getting married, Sharon's at work, and he goes and picks up his daughter from Sharon's mom's house, or from, his stepdaughter from Sharon's mom's house. And they're driving down the highway, and they notice a woman walking down the road. And she looked like she, was struggling, like she had been beat up or something. So Ricky, the good Samaritan that he is, picks her up. And he asks her, like, hey, do you want to go back to my place, clean up, and, get something to eat? And she's like, yeah. And she told him that her boyfriend had beat her up, that they were in, like, a biker group or whatever, and her boyfriend actually just dumped her on the side of the road. And this is Miss Betty Jo Monroe, known as Betty Jo Montana. That's who she is, and this ends up being his next victim. So they get back to the trailer, and he's like, the bathroom's over there. So she goes and she goes and takes a shower, and Ricky grabs a beer, and he starts drinking a little, and then he takes off his clothes, and he goes into the bathroom with Miss Betty Jo and gets in the shower with her. And at this point, she's like, what the hell? But he starts fondling her and kissing on her, and she starts participating, and they have sex in the shower. Well, then after they have sex in the shower, they get out of the shower, and they end up going into Ricky's bedroom, where he shares a bed with his wife, and they have sex in their bed. Okay? And little Miss Sarah ends up walking in on them, and that's an important thing you want to remember. So after they have sex, they go back in there. They, just hang out until Sharon has to get off work. And they go pick up Sharon. And Sharon's like pissed off when she notices that there's this woman in their car. Even though they've like had sex with multiple people and cheat all the time, it pissed her off. So she's already angry. They get home. Betty takes little Sarah into the bedroom. And Ricky wanted Betty Jo to be a babysitter. Like, he wanted her to live with them and babysit Sarah. And Sharon's like, no, I'm not having that. Well, Betty's in there reading, and Sharon's pissed off in the kitchen, and Ricky is drinking. Well, then when Betty Jo comes out, Betty goes into their bedroom, into Ricky and Sharon's bedroom, and she's in there. I don't know what she's doing, but she's in there, and then Sharon, it's 10 o'clock, so Sharon goes back into her daughter's bedroom to tell her goodnight, kiss her goodnight, and that's when Sarah said, hey, Mom, that lady was in your bed with Ricky naked, and she tells her that, so that pisses Sharon off even more. Well, then Ricky goes in there, tells Sarah goodnight, and then when he goes back, Sharon starts like arguing with him, and he's like, well, why don't we just have fun with her, like as in have sex with her? I don't know if at this point they had planned on killing her, but Sharon's like, okay, yeah, let's go do that. So they go in the room and they run it by Betty Jo. And Betty Jo's like, no, I really don't want to do that. But Ricky talks her into it. And she's like, fine, okay. And Ricky takes off her clothes. He takes off his clothes. And then Sharon comes into the bedroom naked. And Sharon, I'm not going to say what she says. So you just have to read the book if you want to know. And she pretty much tells her, like, she wants to do this with her. So Sharon they tie Betty Jo to the bed. And then Sharon gets on top of Betty Jo because Betty Jo, yeah, okay. So at this point, when Sharon gets on top of Betty Jo bites her, and it pisses Sharon off. And Sharon's like, if you do that again, I'm going to kill you. And so she, lowers herself back down, and Betty Jo bites her again. And this was it. That was the breaking point. So they untie poor Betty Jo, and Ricky and Sharon drag her into the bathroom because Sharon wanted Ricky to rape her anally. Okay? I'm not gonna tell y'all all of it, okay? You have to read yourself. It's just too much. Too horrible. So they take her into the bathroom, and Ricky's trying to do what Sharon wants him to, and Betty Jo is just like fighting as much as she can to not have any of this happen, and she's like bucking her hips, and Ricky cannot penetrate, do that. And he finally turns around and tells Sharon, go get me a knife. Okay? So Sharon goes to the bathroom, or to the kitchen, excuse me. She goes to the kitchen and grabs a butcher knife, takes it back into the bathroom, and Ricky pretty much just tells Betty Jo, like, calls her a whore, and he's like, I'm going to kill you. And Betty Jo just starts crying, like, why do you guys hate me? Like, why are you doing this to me? And Sharon actually stabs Betty Jo in the side while Ricky's trying to rape her. So Sharon made the first strike, okay? Which, remember that. Okay. Ugh, just aggravates me. So Ricky ends up taking the knife from Sharon, and he starts stabbing poor Betty Jo. And they stab Betty Jo over 20 times, and they slit her throat. They ended up getting the pocket knife that they had killed Jeffrey Davis with. So they get that pocket knife, they stab her with that pocket knife, and then Betty Jo was still alive. Like, she wasn't dying. Like, she was still fighting for her life. It makes me mad. So Ricky gets off of her, goes into the bedroom, goes to his toolbox, and grabs a ball pin hammer, or I think that's what it's called. So he grabs his hammer, and he goes back into the bathroom, and he just starts beating her in the head, and that's what kills her, okay? So she dies at this point. And Sharon beats her in the head with the hammer too, even though Sharon acts like she's innocent. So she beats poor Betty Jo. They just beat her to death, okay? And then when they're done, they're like, okay, so they start rubbing Betty Jo's blood on them, and they end up having sex in Betty's blood, Okay. All right. Ugh. And after that, they said that, like, Ricky described it as, like, the best sex he's ever had. It was so, like, full of, like, adrenaline rush, and it was so powerful, like, he wanted to do it again. And anyway, so they end up, after they have sex, they end up cleaning up everywhere, right? They clean up everywhere, clean up the bathroom. They wrap Betty Jo in some newspaper. They wrap her in newspaper, you guys. Like, come on, really? So they wrap her in newspaper, and they wrap her in a blanket, and they knew they had to dispose of her. So they pull her out into the car. They put her in the trunk of the car, and they go in there, and they wake up little Miss Sarah. You know, it's way dark. You know, it's nighttime. So they get little Sarah, and they put her in the car, and they go to dump her body. And they actually didn't dump her too far from where they live. Idiots. So they end up dumping her off a bridge. Ricky gets her out of the car, dumps her over the bridge, and they just leave her there. And it was actually by their friend's house too. Okay. So they go and they live their life. They go to work. The next morning, Ricky takes all of Betty's belongings. He takes, like, the rags, the towels, all the stuff they cleaned up with, and he burns them at his work. So now he's down 2 victims, and they keep living their life. Well, that not too long after Betty Jo was murdered, a cop actually found her body, but they couldn't figure out who it was. They ran it through the system. They weren't able to locate her. I guess she had never had a felony. She's had misdemeanors, but she never had a felony, so she wasn't in, like, the DC database. So she became just a Jane Doe. They actually called her Mama Doe, and she was a Jane Doe for 4 years. All right, so we're going to skip along. And then 6 weeks after Betty Jo was murdered, they want another victim. They enjoyed the thrill. They wanted another one. So Ricky dresses up. He goes out, and he goes looking for his next victim. And he's driving down the road, and he comes across a lady walking down the road, and this is Miss Sandra Bailey. This becomes his 3rd victim. And he picks her up, and she's like, well, I'm going to this club to meet her cousins for her cousin's birthday. And this is 50-50 Club. And so he takes her over to 50-50 Club. Like, they're hanging out, they're drinking. And, like, people see him with her. And that's what, like, I don't understand. Like, people see them together the night that she disappeared. Whatever. How this all happens, I don't know. So they actually he ends up talking her into leaving, but he calls his wife, he calls Sharon, because Sharon was waiting for him to call, and he's like, okay, I got someone, we're on our way. Sharon's like, okay, I'll be naked in bed, I'm waiting for you. So they leave, they're, drunk, and they go back to his trailer, and he sits her on the couch, and he's, like, fondling her, making out with her, and then he calls Sharon. So Sandra did not know that he even had a wife. She had no idea. So she's like, who the hell is Sharon? And she starts freaking out. So, like, Betty Jo, I would say she kind of, like, voluntarily participated at the beginning, even though she didn't want to. But Sandra's like, no, I'm not doing this. Like, we're not doing this. So Sharon comes out. She's naked. And Ricky's like, we're all going to have some fun and play. And Sandra's like, no, no, no. And he pretty much drags her into the bedroom, starts trying to take off her clothes. And she starts fighting him. And she's, like, refusing to take her clothes off, refusing to participate. So they just, at this point, had enough of it. They're sick of fighting with her. So they just drag her back into the bathroom, just like Betty Jo. Pushed her over the bathtub. Now, with Betty Jo, he was trying to rape her anally, but he couldn't. But with Sandra, he was able to. So he's raping her, and Sharon has the knife already. And Sharon, just like Betty Jo, Sharon stabs her in the side and just keeps stabbing her. Well, then Ricky ends up taking the knife. He slits her throat, stabs her. Same thing as Betty Jo. I'm not going to go into the details. But exactly what happened with Betty Jo happened with Sandra. So after she's dead, everything the same way. They have sex in her blood, and then they're like, oh God, it's almost morning. What are we going to do? Because we got to get rid of her. They don't have time to get rid of her. So they wrap her in wrap her in a blanket, and then they pull her into their bedroom, and they leave her on the side of the bed. And they leave her there all day while they go to work and they have their grand life. And so they come back that evening and they're like, okay, we gotta dispose of her. So when Sarah goes to bed, they get her body and at this time, because she's a little bit overweight, he described her as like 160 pounds, which to me that's not really that much overweight, but he said she was heavy and she had been laying there all day, so her body's stiff. So they're trying to pull her out of this house and they just drop her outside the window. So they drop her out of the window, she lands on the ground, and they get their vehicle, they pull the vehicle up to the window and they put her in the back of the trunk. And she's stiff, so they're like having to cram her in there and put her in like the fetal position to get her in the back of their vehicle. And then after they have her, they go get Sarah. And this time they knew that they couldn't dump her too close to their house because people were going to know that they're connected to Betty Jo, or that Betty Jo and her are connected. The killings are connected. So they drive out like 72 miles away near Henrietta, and they're looking out like in the bottoms for somewhere to dispose of her body. And they've come across like a wooded patch, and so he gets out of the car, he pulls her out. She's a little heavy, she's stiff, and he's trying to pull her over to this wooded area. But then he realizes like you can still see her, and he turns around and he notices like a culvert in the road big enough to shove her body in. So he drags her back over there and he shoves her into this culvert. He bends her knees as much as he could, puts her up in there in the fetal position in this culvert, and they leave her. They leave her body. Okay. Well, the ding dong didn't look at the weather, and not too long after they left her, they had a lot of rain, which ended up pushing her body out of the culvert. And a gas company man was driving down the road, and he noticed like a body on the side of the road, and he ended up stopping. He calls the cops because he realizes like this is a woman's body and she had stab wounds, so he knew she was murdered. So the cops come out, and when they took her in, Sandra had a mole on her face, and they didn't include it like in her description of her body. And so the day after she had actually been kidnapped or adult napped or whatever you want to call it, after she was murdered, her family had reported her missing. But in the missing report, in the description, they said she had a mole, she was a little bit heavy, had a mole, all of her details. But the cops had left that out when they had found her body. So they weren't able to actually identify her until she was murdered at the end of November. They found her at the beginning of December, and they identified her in January. Okay? So that's when all that happened. And then they didn't kill anyone again until the end of the year. And, they just continuing drinking, drugs, doing their thing. Ricky had actually checked into rehab a couple times. That didn't go over good. Ended up checking out of rehab. Yep, he failed at that one. And then on December 27th, this is his last victim. He is at Lake Worth, and he's at Casino Beach, and he's sitting there getting drunk. It's his birthday, and Sharon hadn't got him a cake, hadn't even told him happy birthday, and he's like depressed, and he's upset about that. And so he's just, drinking his little sorrows away. And Volvo pulls up next to him, and he had recognized the Volvo, and he had recognized the gentleman in the Volvo because he had done tricks for him, and he's been his client before. And so this guy, Stephen Fefferman, gets out of the vehicle. I want to say Stephen is like 28 years old, 27, 28. And Stephen is a advertising executive for a news company, news company in Dallas. So he had, a pretty good job. He was well known. Unlike his other victims were just, not really well known. One was, had been an ex-stripper, just a hitchhiker. No one was really looking for her. And this one, people knew him. He was a big deal. And so Stephen gets into Ricky's car, and he's talking. He's like, hey, you want to come back to my place? Ricky goes, sure, if you go buy me a case of beer. So Stephen gets out of his car, gets back into his car, goes to the gas station, buys a case of beer for Ricky, and then comes back, and Ricky's like, okay, we'll go back to your place, but I have to go drop off my car first so my wife has a vehicle. So he goes and Steven follows him to his house, and he drops off his vehicle, and then he gets in Steven's Volvo. And I don't think that Ricky actually intended on killing Steven when he originally went to his house. But they're sitting in the living room talking, and they're talking about like the newest pornos and, all that kind of stuff. And Steven had mentioned to him how he liked to look at little boys and he liked to mess with little boys. Now, I'm not going to say that this is true. This is what Ricky said. So I don't know if Steven was a pedophile. All right. So this is just what Ricky had told the police, and he had told the writer of the book, okay? And so this pisses him off. Remember, Ricky was raped when he was 11 years old. So he was totally against that. And it kind of made him mad. And then Steven goes and gets in the shower. He takes his shower, and when he comes out, he gets back on the couch, and they kind of mess around a little bit. And you can actually Google his house, and you can look at the pictures. I'll put his address down in the description box, and you can go see the house now. You can see inside of it, so you'll be able to understand like what I'm saying. So his living room was kind of sunk down a little bit, and then he had like a few steps, and his kitchen was on the right, and he had a dining room on the left, and then there was like hallways. And he lived in like a townhouse, and it had like a garage, and then it was pretty nice. Definitely back in, the 80s. This is in 86. And they go up into, so Ricky's like, sure, let's go to your bedroom. And so they go up, and they go to his bedroom, and he notices like there was some ties laid out on his bed. So he knew that Steven's, plan was to tie Ricky up. And Ricky's like, you're not tying me up. Ricky doesn't like to be like weak and to be held down. But he's told Steven, he goes, well, why don't you let me tie you up? And then after we have fun with that, then you can tie me up. And Ricky had actually noticed, and this is Ricky's point of view, that there was a knife at the edge of the bed, like under the bed, and he saw it. And so he kind of pissed him off even more because he thought that Steven wanted to hurt him. And so, it's so crazy. So he ends up tying up Steven. And he doesn't let Steven know that he's angry. And then after he ties him up, he, like, pretty much lets him know, like, what the hell was your plan? Like, why the hell do you have this knife? So he grabs this knife, and Steven's like, I just wanted to have fun. There was nothing really behind it. I just wanted, to have some rough fun with you. And that's when Ricky reaches across, and he, slits his throat. He slits his throat from his left ear to his right shoulder, and he just starts stabbing him. And just like the other victims, Steven doesn't die right away. And so Ricky's just plunging the knife into him everywhere. And Steven is like flopping all over the bed with his hands tied. And Ricky's stabbing him in the back and the side and the head, just everywhere. And poor Steven is just sitting there screaming. And that pisses Ricky off more because he's in a townhouse. And he's like freaking out that like the next door neighbor is going to be able to hear that Steven's screaming. So he gets up and he goes and he castrates Steven while Steven's still alive, and he shoves it in his mouth to shut him up as like a gag. Ugh, just so disgusting. And he just continues to just brutally stab Steven until Steven is dead. And after Steven's dead, he leaves the knife in his neck. He leaves a knife in his down there, and he realizes like what he did, and he's like, oh shit, I just killed someone. And I really don't think his intention was killing Steven when he went there. And so he grabs the blankets because he just could not look at his body. So he grabs the blankets, covers him up, and then he starts going through his drawers looking for money. He dumps everything out on top of Steven, and he goes and gets some beer. He drinks for a little bit, and then he realizes like, oh shoot, I need to clean up. Like, I gotta get out of here. It's almost morning. So he goes in the bathroom, cleans up all his fingerprints. He goes back to Steven, uncovers him, cleans up his knives, makes sure there's no fingerprints anywhere, goes in the kitchen, cleans up the kitchen, cleans up the living room, fingerprint wise. But he had already destroyed the house looking for money. So then he realizes, oh my gosh, I don't even have a car. Like, what am I going to do? So he goes, I'll just take his car. So he goes in the garage, gets in Steven's car, leaves the garage open, and takes off. And then a little bit down the road, the gas light comes on, and he's like, oh shit, I'm not going to make it home. I'm running out of gas. So he goes into a gas station again. He goes into Texaco, pays for gas. He puts $5 in gas in, and they didn't even notice that he had blood all over him. Like, come on, people, it's not Halloween. Like, how do you not realize that this man's covered in blood twice? And they do nothing, okay? So he gets back in the car, and he's driving a little bit down the road, and he's almost home, and the car starts jerking. He's got a flat tire. So he gets out of the car, locks the car. What a good citizen. He locks the car so no one can steal his car, even though he just did, and he murdered him. And he starts walking, and then he's like, oh, shoot, I didn't look to see if I left anything in the car. So he goes back to the car, breaks the window, gets in, cleans it up, makes sure there's nothing in there, and he starts walking again. And this is when good old Sharon, crazy Sharon, pulls up. She's like looking for him because it's late and he hadn't come home. He hadn't called her, and she's like freaking out at this point. And she pulls up and she's like, realizes like he's covered in blood. Obviously, she already knew what he did. She helped him with 2 murders. She knows he's a serial killer now, and he's just, come on. She already knew. So he gets in the car. He goes, I'll tell you about it later, and he eventually tells her about it. And she didn't care. Like, she didn't do anything. And they ended up this is over the weekend. So Monday morning, he had a good job, and they realized, like, this isn't like Steven to not show up to work, okay? So Steven doesn't show up to work, and after they got off work that day, his friends go to his house and to look for him because he wouldn't answer the phone. And so when they pull up, Steven's garage is open, and his car's gone, and they're like, okay, what the heck? That's not normal, and that's not something Steven would do. He wouldn't leave his garage open. So he goes to the landlord, and he asks the landlord, like, hey, our friend that lives here didn't show up to work today. Can you do a welfare check and make sure he's okay? Which they didn't call the cops yet. And so this guy that, the manager of these townhouses, he goes inside, and that's when he realizes, like, this house has been destroyed, and he thinks that there had been a robbery. So he goes up the steps, he goes past the kitchen, and everything's still destroyed. And then he goes into Pfefferman's bedroom, Steven's bedroom. And this is when he notices that there's 2 feet hanging off the bed. And there's, like, blankets. And he realizes, like, there's blood. It freaks him out. He runs out. He calls the cops. And then the cops come over. And they weren't able to find enough evidence to figure out who killed poor Steven. So Steven's murder actually goes unsolved for 2 years. So in this 2 years after this is why I say that there are 4 murders that they know that Ricky committed, but they said that there could be 9 to 12 more people that he murdered that are unsolved that they don't know about. Because for 2 years, like, he was killing people repeatedly, but for 2 years he didn't kill anyone. And that's why they think that there could be possible other victims. Now, Ricky says that he might know of one, but he was so drunk, and he actually got into, like, the drugs got worse. So he can't even remember if there is more victims than the ones that they know of. So these 2 years, him and Sharon, they stay together, and they start getting more into drugs. Okay, so they're doing methamphetamine, like really into drugs at this point, and their relationship went downhill a whole lot. They start fighting. They are so dependent on meth that Sharon pretty much quit caring about him. All she wanted was her next fix. And this is like the downfall of everything. This is the end of it all. And Ricky's dad, I told you that we would talk about him a little bit later. Well, this is later. So Ricky's dad ended up later down the road in his life, he started, after his wife had passed away, he started manufacturing methamphetamine, and him and Perry would distribute drugs. And he would keep his drug money at the shop. Well, Sharon and Perry, Ricky's little brother, they had broken into the shop, and they stole $40,000 from Bill. And remember, Bill's not a very nice man. And, Ricky's freaking out. Like, Bill's finds out that the money's missing, and he's like after Ricky because he knew that Sharon and Sharon and Timmy had stole the money. And so he's looking for them, and he can't find him. Ricky hides Sharon out in a hotel. Timmy runs away and hides out in a hotel from his dad because he knew his dad was going to kill him if he found him. And so Sharon just starts freaking out, like she can't handle this anymore. Their marriage wasn't good anyways. So she literally comes home and she withdraws Sarah from school. And while Ricky's at work, she clears out the apartment and she moves out. So Ricky comes home. Her dad is a reverend. Yeah, can you even believe that? Her dad's a pastor. And Reverend Dollar's there. He's helping Sharon move with the U-Haul. And Sharon's like, I can't do this anymore, Ricky. I'm leaving. So she ends up leaving him. But she would come back for drugs. Like, she would have Ricky get drugs for her. And they would have sex and stuff. But she would not, like, go back to him as a relationship. She had filed for divorce. And not too long after she left him, she checked into rehab. And while in rehab, she pretty much told her counselors at rehab that she had helped her husband murder 2 women and that her husband had murdered 2 other men. And she pretty much tells them everything. And so they take her to the Fort Worth Police Department and she calls Ricky. And I think they're trying to see if Ricky will talk about it on the phone. And he doesn't, because he had a feeling, like the way that she was acting, he had a feeling that she was up to no good and that she was probably at the police department. So he's like, I'm not saying nothing. And he tells her, I'm not saying nothing on here. And she, she's saying she's at the rehab during all of this. But she does tell him she loves him before they got off the phone. And this is the last time that Ricky ever talked to Sharon, okay? So he knew that the cops were probably going to come for him, so he just sits there in his apartment watching TV, and about 9 hours after Sharon had told the police, he starts seeing like shadows outside his window, and he looks out the window and he sees a ton of cops. Well, I can imagine a ton because he was a serial killer, so they probably thought, like, this man's crazy, okay? So, anyways, sorry, something was down there. And I'm not laughing at this. It's just something. So Ricky just gets a gun and he's like, well, I'm just going to go out with a gun. They can shoot me. I want to die anyways. I've lost my wife. I know I'm going to go to prison. I'll probably get the death penalty. And he just gets a gun. He's going to go outside with the gun. And then he realized, like, no, I better not do that. So he just goes outside, gets on his knees, puts his hands up, and is like, come and get me. Okay? I did it. Come and get me. So they take him down to the police department, and he confesses to everything. He tells them everything that he did. But he loved Sharon so much that he didn't even tell them that Sharon was involved. He left her out of it. Like, I can't believe he did that, but he did. So he leaves her out of it because he thinks that Bill Green, his dad, turned him in because of the $40,000. No, Ricky. No. So he leaves Sharon out of it. Sharon tells her side of the story, and she doesn't get charged. They let her go because Ricky didn't say she did it. Well, a couple days sitting in jail, he gets a newspaper, and in the newspaper it says that his wife, Sharon, Green, turned him in. They caught this crazy serial killer, and it's all in the newspaper, and that pissed him off. He was like, how dare she do that to me? She turned me in. I protected her, and she turned me in. So he tells the police, he's like, I need to recant my story. I told you a lie. So he finally retells his story, and he tells them the actual true story about Sharon's involvement. So they bring Sharon back in for questioning, and Sharon says, yes, I did stab her, but Ricky made me stab her. Like, Ricky held my hand. He held her hand while she stabbed this poor woman. So that's what she tells the police. And so the police end up letting her go again, and after some investigating, they go ahead and they charge her with capital murder too. So they arrest her back, and she has to go to jail and wait trial just like Ricky. So she's waiting for her trial for capital murder of Betty Jo and Sandra Bailey. Those are the ones she participated in. Well, they are charging Ricky with capital murder for Stephen Fefferman's murder. He does get charged later down for the other 3, but I'll tell you about that in a little bit. So it's Sharon's trial first. So Sharon goes to trial. Her defense paints her as a poor wife that was abused by her husband and manipulated in drugs and all of this, and her husband threatened to kill her, and she just plays the victim during her trial. So they ended up finding her guilty of murder, okay? And now it's sentencing time. And Ricky's like, okay, they found her, he's reading the paper, he's following it, and then they find her guilty, and he's like, okay, good, they found her guilty. So now it's sentencing time. You guys are not even going to believe this, okay? Like, I can't even believe it. So, sentencing time, they found her guilty. She gets 10 years, probation. This woman savagely killed these women, participated in it just as much as Ricky did, and she gets 10 years probation. I'm not even kidding you. She did. So she got 10 years. She got to walk free. She just had to report to her, parole officer, and she got free. So to this day, to this stinking day, she is living her life. I found her after a little research. She's living her life, her grand little life, and acting like she never did what she did. Yeah, that is not okay. It's not fair to those poor women that died. That's not justice for them, in my opinion. But anyways, that's that. It makes me angry, so we're going to roll on past that. So that's what happens with Sharon. So Ricky is like pissed. He goes, I knew she would get off. I knew she would lie. She would manipulate him. And he's just absolutely pissed. But he wanted to get the death penalty because he wanted to die. Like, he didn't want to be around anymore. But then he realized, like, he really didn't want to die. He asked, for forgiveness. He found God. And he actually had, he felt bad for what he did. Now, and he regretted his decision. He had sympathy for the things that he did, okay? Not making it right because none of it was right, okay? But he did. And so so now it's starting like Ricky's trial. And Ricky goes to trial, and they find him guilty, of course. And now it's sentencing. So the prosecutors, they want the death penalty. That's what's up on the table. And then the defense is fighting for life in prison. And life, you don't get parole in Texas. So he's like fighting for life in prison. And they're fighting for the death penalty over on this side. And he ends up going to sentencing time, and they do give Ricky the death penalty. And Ricky's like, well, I knew that was going to happen anyway, so he already expected to have the death penalty. So they give him the death penalty, and he is to go to death row in Huntsville, Texas. And that's actually where he ended up sitting out on death row until 1997, when he was executed with lethal injection in 1997. And he did tell the families that he was sorry, and he asked for forgiveness for what he did, and he regretted the mistakes that he did. He blamed a lot of it on Bill Green, but Bill Green didn't hold the knife and stab those victims. Ricky did. And so that is the life of Ricky Lee Green. You can do your own research and find some more facts. You can even Google it. You can see the victims. It's disgusting. You don't even really want to do that, but it is out there. His father did get arrested, and his dad did go to prison for 20 years for drug trafficking. Perry, his brother, went to prison for a couple years for drug trafficking. He got busted. I do not know how Perry is doing now. Bill did pass away. Perry is still alive. Timmy, his younger brother, he had a few bad years. He went to prison himself. He got out of prison quite a while back, years ago, and he's doing really, really good. He has a good life. I've actually met Timmy. His sister Teresa, she has a good life, a family. She's doing good. So even those bad things, they were able to turn their life around and find some peace and have a good life. Sharon's alive. Her daughter is an adult. She's got children. She lives in Texas, little Sarah. Jamie, her sister Jamie, she did pass away last year. The first dollar that he had sex with, that sister Jamie. And that's pretty much the story of Ricky Lee Green. So y'all tell me what you think about it. Do you think that Sharon should have received a bigger punishment than 10 years probation? Because I think she did. I think she's just disgusting. She's horrible. And I have no sympathy for anything that she did, because she didn't have to do what she did. She didn't have to ask him to kill Jeffrey, to drink blood. So in my opinion, I think she should have got life in prison at least. And anyways, y'all just let me know down in the comment box what you guys think of that crazy, insane story. And I will talk to you all next time. I'll be posting a few tutorials in the next couple days. So we're going to jump from crazy scary to Christmas. So I will talk to you all really soon. Y'all have a good Halloween. Bye.